Alright guys, Murphs here, and today we're going to talk about sporterized military surplus rifles. Do they suck? Are they worthy of a lot of the hate and discontent that gets thrown their way? Now, in order to get into this, we're going to have to go ahead and define some terms. First off, what is a military surplus rifle? Well, that would be a rifle that has been identified as being outdated and no longer in keeping with current tactics or technology or anything along those lines. So it is surplused out. It is removed from service and oftentimes, at least in the past, released onto the civilian market. We've actually had, like in the United States, we had the civilian marksmanship program, which would get a hold of these surplus rifles and then resell them to members or people who were in some way interested in military surplus arms in order to be able to take part in the activity of shooting, which is the whole point of the civilian marksmanship program. And then in addition to that, there have been plenty of other militaries that decided to offload their arms onto the US market. We would see a lot of that post-World War II at a time when bolt-action rifles were getting replaced by initially semi-automatic rifles and then a very quick jump into select-fire weapon systems. And then like when the Cold War ended and the wall came down, there would be a flood of surplus rifles because we were no longer concerned about World War III. So all of these countries in Eastern Europe would start unloading their Mosin Nagants, Tokarev rifles, all those types of things onto the US market. Now in the future, we're really probably not going to see surplus rifles, at least not in the manner that we're used to. Like handguns probably still a thing, but with several changes that have occurred in American gun laws, like the Hughes Amendment, how the ATF views what constitutes a machine gun and all those types of things, in addition to other types of import restrictions on like what can be imported into the country, machine guns can't come in. So those have to come in the form of parts kits where the receivers have been destroyed, the thing that had the giggle switch in it has been destroyed and removed. And then also the barrels cannot be imported anymore because for some reason we decided that barrels were a problem. So then you get the kit gun, you have parts and pieces of a military surplus gun, and then you or a distributor can build it out in order to be able to then have a functional weapon. We saw this with FALs, AKs, Stens, all that kind of stuff once upon a time. And in the future, that's probably what it's going to look like, or militaries just destroying their surplus stockpiles instead of actually releasing them anywhere. So like I bet you we will never see a surplus to HKG-36 parts kit. So that is what a military surplus rifle is, and it's pretty much anything that's pre-World War II at this point when it comes to a rifle. SKSs kind of snuck through. We'll talk about that more as we go, but for the most part, we're talking about like Mosin Nagants, M1 Garands, Carcanos, Arisakas, all those types of things. Get back into like World War I rifles, pre-World War I rifles to some extent, so on and so forth. What is sporterizing? Well, sporterizing is the act of taking one of those surplus rifles and then cutting it to meet a different purpose, turning it into a hunting rifle, a target rifle, or perhaps some sort of competition rifle in like an unlimited class of military surplus competition. Now, military surplus competitions aren't that big in the United States. They still kind of pop up, but it doesn't have a huge following. They seem to have a strong following in like Australia, Canada, the UK, a lot of these other countries that don't necessarily have a lot of the same firearms rights that the United States has. Switzerland, all those types of things. Now, traditionally, we would say that the military surplus collector despises the sporterizer. They often think of them as Bubba in his garage with a hacksaw, taking it to these priceless and irreplaceable little bits of history. What we're going to discuss here today is that the case? Is that how this works out? Is this how we should view someone who sporterizes military surplus rifles? Or is there a little bit more context that needs to be taken into account whenever it is that we talk about sporters? So with that being the case, we have two ideas we're going to go after that are under an umbrella idea. So we're going to discuss value and practicality, and these both reside underneath the umbrella of quality of the build. All right, so let's go ahead and get into value. Once upon a time, every time a mass military surplus importation has occurred, the prices have been low. The old timers talk about when SKSs were $60 a pop, or I can remember when Mosin Nagants were like $100 a rifle. And that was all well and good when importation was occurring. Once importation stopped, especially the Mosin Nagant, because we had trade embargoes and sanctions and stuff like that with Russia and China, and then we've always had them with North Korea, which is a no doubt gold mine of military surplus rifles. Once those two locations stopped importing rifles in the United States, we started to see the prices go up, because that is how this works, supply and demand. When supply was high, to meet demand, prices could be low. Once supply ceased and there was still demand, prices started to go up. I don't know why military surplus collectors seem to struggle with this concept of capitalism. Like, we're capitalists in everything up until it impacts our own handbook or our own pocketbook. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Regardless, now the rifles have started to appreciate. So yes, once upon a time you could get Mosin Nagants for $100. Now you're looking at closer to $400 to $500. I would consider a deal to be about $350. That's the reality of the matter. SKSs are even worse, $60 once upon a time, where I'm seeing people listing them for $800. I would be curious to see if they're actually getting purchased at $800. Now, there are the occasional importation of surplus rifles. Recently, some Chinese SKSs came in. Recently, it's been a couple of years. They came in at about $320 to $350, which is higher than what the original importation was, but these importations do not happen very often. Those were rifles that resided in another country for X amount of time, and then we decided that meant that they're no longer Chinese and they could be imported in the United States because it would not benefit China to do so. I think is how the socioeconomic political thing plays out there in that case. So these occasionally come in, but they're coming in at higher prices because they come in less often, and there is still a demand and interest in the SKS. And it's definitely cheaper than anything that you're seeing out on the market right now. So you have that going for you. I would consider a more reasonable price for an SKS to be around $450 to $500. Shading $600 if it's a really nice example, in my own opinion. When it comes to a sporterized surplus rifle, I do not expect to pay current market value for a surplus rifle. So let's say we had a Lee Enfield number 1 Mark III. Okay, I can remember when those were like $250 to $350. Now I'm seeing them listed for as high as like $12. I think that's a little outrageous. I would consider a good price for them to be closer to like $750, $800 is where I would have interest in a short magazine Lee Enfield at this point. I have the interest when it's the original intact rifle. If somebody sporterizes it, I do not intend to pay that much money for it. I'm expecting to see closer around the 500 mark, if not lower, depending on the quality of the build. That's the envelope that we keep this under. So if it's something that was done very professionally, I might be willing to pay a little bit more money. If it was definitely a hack job in somebody's basement, I'm less interested in paying more money for it. And I'm definitely not interested in giving the person who probably bought it at a way lower price more money for the thing that he did to the rifle. The important thing to keep in mind about surplus rifles in general is that it is the historical interest that inflates the value to begin with. These guns were built as tools, and though they are examples of a bygone era of high quality manufacture in steel and wood and all that kind of stuff prior to the current manufacture of, alloys and plastics and all those types of things, the rifles definitely have soul, but that soul is imbued to them not just by the manner in which they were manufactured, but the deeds that they most likely performed. Being able to pick out the pieces of parts and determine what year this rifle was produced or what it might have gone through in its lifetime as things were changed around, because a lot of those rifles will have years stamped on them to begin with. But regardless, being able to imagine that it fought at Stalingrad or something along those lines. It was at Guadalcanal. It served its owners faithfully in service and all that kind of stuff. Like, that is what gives these rifles value. They were not produced to be valuable rifles. They were produced to be tools. And this is a concept that we're gonna see come up again as we go through this conversation. But the sporterization process just further makes this thing a tool. Somebody picked it up cheaper than what they could get a hunting rifle for, and then they modified it to be more acceptable for the hunting type purpose. We'll get into that more here in Practicality after a little bit. So I don't expect to pay top dollar for a sporterized surplus rifle. But that doesn't mean I don't have interest in the sporterized surplus rifle. It's a key factor in this discussion overall as we go. That then segues us kind of neatly into our discussion on practicality. So original rifles like a Mosin Nagant 9130, that's a pretty long rifle and may not necessarily be very handy inside of a shooting blind or perhaps in like dense foliage or something along those lines. So somebody may take that rifle and cut it down to make it more adaptable. Iron sights. So if we take this Swedish M38 Mauser, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. This is a wonderful, accurate rifle. Very flat shooting, 6.5 millimeter cartridge. This would be a great deer rifle, and I would very much so like to go and take some game with this. However, there's a limiting factor here, and that is these iron sights. Now, it's not that these iron sights are bad. These iron sights do exactly what it is that they're supposed to do, and I would feel very comfortable taking deer-sized game maybe a little bit beyond 200 yards. But the limiting factor in this case, when we're talking about these iron sights, are my eyes and the ability to be able to ethically engage that animal. If we're talking about engaging man-sized targets or engaging men in battle and stuff like that, I am willing to stretch this rifle far further. I'm pretty much willing to take this thing all the way to whatever it is that I can identify as a target with my naked eye, because again, my eye is the limiting factor here. But if I shoot a man in the shoulder, I may not have killed him. I've still removed him from the fight. He is incapable of continuing to resist. Whereas with a deer, if I blow a leg off or something along those lines, like yes, the animal's incapable of resisting, but the animal's also in an incredible amount of pain. And that doesn't sit well for me in my ethics and all those types of things. So when you talk about a sporterized rifle, all of a sudden someone decides that they want it to be more adaptable for the purpose. They may want a scope. So they may install a scope so that they can identify targets at a greater distance and take a more ethical shot. That's fine. It is meeting its purpose at that point. It is still being a tool. And this is where we also get into, again, the discussion about the quality of the build. I've seen some very poor quality sporterized rifles that did not really do that much to enhance themselves from what they originally were, except maybe be shorter. And yes, as you shorten them, you lighten them, you're removing stock, you're removing barrel, you're dropping off the bayonet lug that's no longer relevant to you, you're dropping off barrel bands and all those types of things. But the best examples I've seen have gone through real gunsmithing, or perhaps were provided by a distributor. So for one example, the Carcano 3841, the scoped Carcano 3841 that killed Kennedy, was a military surplus Carcano that a distributor drilled and tapped for scopes, which the rifle was not originally designed for, so that it could be used for the purpose of hunting, or in this case, killing presidents. There are other examples where gunsmiths have gotten a hold of these rifles and adapted them very well for a new purpose. So also, something else to keep in mind with the scopes and all that kind of stuff, this Swiss K31. Again, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. This is a wonderfully accurate rifle, an absolute joy to shoot. However, the front sight on this is set all the way over to the right, so I have to hold drastically left at even just 100 yards to be able to engage with it, which would shorten my engagement envelope with this particular rifle trying to get at the boiler room on a deer. Now, I have tapped on this front sight to no end. I have done everything I can to try to move this front sight, and I cannot get a hold of the front sight adjustment tool that is supposed to go for this rifle. And even if I could, it would be incredibly expensive. It's over 150 bucks for the front sight adjustment tool. I just haven't been able to find one in stock anywhere in order to be able to make the adjustments to the sight. So now, once again, if you're talking about that type of application and all those types of things, you can see where someone would be like, well, I mean, I don't need all that length. I don't need the stacking rod. And I really do need a scope in order to be able to engage with this rifle. You can see where the utility aspect of this really starts to show up. Not only do we see utility in mounting scopes and stuff like that, but what about chambering? So when the rifles initially came in, all these different surplus rifles, they would also come in along with ammunition. The ammunition would be super cheap. Same thing, Mosin Nagant. I remember buying paper-bound packets of 20 rounds of Mosin Nagant ammunition for like $5. You could get a lot of ammunition for a Mosin Nagant with just whatever change you could find in your couch cushions. But that ammunition did not last. And now we're at the point where Mosin Nagant ammunition has definitely gone up to where you're looking at like $14 to $18 a box easy. And that's just for like FMJs. It's not even necessarily talking about soft point ammunition. And availability is another thing that you have to discuss. I have quite a few military surplus rifles, and I spend a lot of time searching for that ammunition to be able to fire out of them. It's not something that you just find at Walmart. Especially in a hunting type load, if that's the application that you're trying to use it for. So it's not unusual to see mostly Mauser and Arisaka actions rechambered into something else. Carcanos and Mosin Nagants, SMLEs, a lot of times you don't really see those necessarily rechambered because people have a tendency to attribute weak actions to them because they are a split action design, or they are a split bridge design. However, I've never seen anything to really support that. That's a whole separate conversation for another time. So at a time when you can pick up the rifle cheap and you can get the ammunition cheap, that's all well and good. Once that time passes, what do you do then? Well, it's not unusual to see those rifles then rebarreled over into something that is on the shelves, 30-06, or perhaps your favorite whatever whiz-bang Wildcat cartridge that you like to reload for. You can go ahead and take those very strong actions and rechamber them to those cartridges to then still get use out of the rifle. It comes back to the utilitarian nature of the rifles to begin with. All right, guys, so that's our discussion over, our areas of emphasis. Why don't we go ahead and get into the conclusions portion here. I remember when I was a young man looking to buy my first rifle, I was looking at a lot of different hunting rifles and stuff like that. And I was looking at like Howas and Remington 783s and all those types of things. And what I wound up getting was this Mosin Nagant WZ44, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. Because I got it for just over $100. And my intention was to use this for a hunting rifle. No, I never actually took this thing afield for hunting, and I would eventually get like actual dedicated hunting rifles. And clearly, I never sporterized it. However, when I was a kid, I was looking at options that would like attach to the rear sight so that I could mount a scope on the rifle to make it more beneficial for my purposes, so that I could actually hunt with it and stuff like that. There are several very positive attributes involved in sporterizing a military surplus rifle. And right now there's a bunch of milsurp collectors that are rolling their eyes at me. And that's fine, guys. I'm a casual military surplus collector. If I happen to run across a good deal, I will purchase it. Absolutely no problem. But I don't necessarily search out specific rifles and all those types of things. So I do, every time I go into a gun shop, pawn shop, or a big box store that has a used gun section, I do search for military surplus rifles. And more often than not, my gaze is met with some type of sporterized military surplus rifle. But that does not mean that there is no value left, that there's no history left in that particular rifle, because that's what the military surplus collector is worried about. Depending on what process the sporterizing went through, you can still pick out things about that rifle. You can still pick out features and markings and all those types of things that tell that rifle story. And part of that rifle story is becoming a new form of tool for a new owner. A rifle that was used by somebody to put meat on the table, to provide for their family. That's pretty honorable. That is a spectacular use of a piece of history to continue it functioning as a tool. Something that was used to be able to teach youth how to shoot and be respectful of firearms, be involved in the Second Amendment and all those types of things. There are many men out there that will attribute Sporterized Mausers to being their first hunting rifle and their first real involvement in firearms. That's great. That's fantastic. There is nothing wrong with that, and that's something that should be more recognized in this case. And you can still have history involved in rifles as well. I remember years ago, I was at a pawn shop in Virginia, and I saw a sporterized Arisaka sitting off to the side. And it was a terrible job. Someone had done a terrible job on this rifle. They had done a terrible job of hacking it down. They had like spot welded this very, very crappy rear sight on it. Like, it just looked bad. And what really kind of hurt my soul about that rifle was that it had an unmolested chrysanthemum on the receiver. Now, for those of you who don't know, in 1945, when the Japanese surrendered, the order went out that all chrysanthemums on weapons were to be in some way disfigured before being handed over to the Allies. And MacArthur would also echo that order. So, for a rifle to have an unmolested mum, it either was captured prior to 1945, or somebody did not follow that order. That's very interesting. Now, it's unfortunate that it was on a sporterized rifle, but that history is still there. That mum is still present. It did not disappear just because the rifle got cut down. So that story is still present. Out of my own collection, I have 2 Sporterized rifles. Currently, I have this 91 Carcano, which we can see has been cut down and otherwise left alone. This didn't go through a hefty sporterization process. I actually saw another one of these at a gun show today, pretty much in the same format, though maybe slightly longer. And also a little less money than what I picked this up for. And about the same age. This rifle is definitely an example of kind of a home build. It's very simple. It looks like somebody more or less just cut down the stock. Maybe they took it to a gunsmith to get this front sight installed, barrel cut down, front sight installed, and recrowned and all that type of stuff. Yet it still has the markings and features on this rifle that has a story to tell and is an entry in my museum whenever it is, the museum that is my gun collection, whenever it is that people come in and check things out, whenever I have visitors to the house. But then I also have this Argentinian Mauser, which has been rechambered to 30-06. Again, it still has, like the Argentinian crest, it still has all of the bones of a Mauser rifle, but it has been converted into a caliber that isn't 7.65 Argentine and I can actually get a hold of more easily, though I have a lot of 7.65 Argentine lying around. A friend of mine has a Mauser 98K, which is actually the rifle that I used in my World War II rifle comparison video for the 98K, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. That rifle, this is a little bit of a read ahead on that particular video, that rifle would not group on paper at 100 yards. And he spent a lot of time working on that bore since then, trying to get that rifle to be more accurate. It's unlikely that that rifle is going to get more accurate. Like, these guns were used in combat. They were fired with ammunition that was corrosively primed, and they probably didn't necessarily get as cleaned as often as they needed to be. The bores are not necessarily in good condition. While that's something you have to keep in mind with military surplus rifles in general, is that you should probably get the bore and the headspace checked on it. It's especially true still, possibly even more so, of sporterized rifles, which I have to admit I haven't done a very good job of, but I do check my cartridge casings for any signs of like overpressure, any issues and stuff like that. That's the closest approximation I get to actually having checked out by a certified gunsmith, because I'm definitely not a certified gunsmith. If that rifle were to be sporterized, if it were to be cut down, if it were to be rebarreled into something more modern, something that's more available, like 270 or something along those lines, that rifle would get a second lease on life. While still preserving, especially if you were very careful about it, while still being able to preserve some of its history, some of the things that make that rifle what it is, while also getting the opportunity to do more than just make it go bang for $2 a round. Making it go bang and then also put meat on the table, or make it go bang and also shoot a worthwhile grouping that you would actually want to show off to your friends and all that kind of stuff. While sporterizing is not the answer in all circumstances, I think there are some conditions that we can agree that we could either have a wall hanger or we could have something that we can shoot. And at the end of the day, I have zero interest in firearms that I can't shoot. Wall hangers do nothing for me. Firearms, in my opinion, are meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be taken out and shot and talked about and handled and all those types of things. Living pieces of history is what they're meant to be, not something that's just viewed. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys find this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.